I run the overnight calibration loop on Relay Station Halden Reach, which is a fancy way of saying I sit alone in a booth for 6 hours and make sure the comm arrays don't drift out of tune with each other. It's a dull job. The only interesting thing about it is that I hum while I work, and 3 years ago that habit accidentally raised a family of apex predators. I should explain that better. Halden Reach keeps a quarantine wing for confiscated cargo, smuggled goods mostly, and sometimes smuggled animals. 3 years back they brought in a crate of orphaned sovereign cubs, pulled off a poaching vessel that never should have made it past customs. Sovereign are big cat-coated apex hunters, tawny-striped, gold-eyed, built to run down prey twice their size once they're grown. These 3 weren't grown. They were small enough to fit in a supply crate, half-starved, and so frightened of every voice on the station that they wouldn't eat. The vet tried sedatives, tried isolation, tried recorded parent calls pulled from some xenobiology archive that didn't match the dialect these particular cubs had grown up hearing. Nothing worked. They were 3 weeks from being written off as a loss neither the budget nor the enclosure could carry. My booth backs onto the quarantine wing through a maintenance wall. I didn't know that the first night I ran calibration with the old tune my grandmother used to hum stuck in my head. Some flat, wandering 4-note thing. The kind of tune you don't perform, you just leak while your hands are busy. I wasn't singing to anyone. I was retuning an antenna array. The vet found all 3 cubs pressed against the wall the next morning, quiet for the first time since they'd arrived. Nobody planned what came after. The vet asked if I'd keep running the loop with the audio bleed-through active. I said sure, it wasn't costing me anything. 3 years of sure later, the cubs are not cubs. They're taller than me at the shoulder, coats gone deep amber, claws long enough to open a supply crate without touching the seal. And they still come find me when my shift starts, because as far as they're concerned, the sound I make when I'm not trying to make anything is the first thing that ever told them they were safe. I never taught them commands, never tried to. What we have isn't obedience, it's recognition. They know my voice, my walk, the particular way I go quiet when I'm concentrating, and they've decided that's worth staying near. I've got no illusions about what they'd do to anyone who gave them a reason. I've just never given them one. The growing itself happened in a way that never felt dramatic while it was happening. One season they were still small enough to ride my shoulders during feeding rounds, all 3 of them fighting for the same spot. The next, they'd outgrown the enclosure's low fence, and nobody bothered rebuilding it taller, because by then it was obvious a fence had never been what kept them there. The vet used to joke that we were raising them backward. Most predator handling programs start with distance and build trust. Ours started with trust and never got around to the distance. I didn't see the harm in it. I still don't. A sovereign that trusts you completely is not a safer animal than one that doesn't. It's the same animal, aimed somewhere else. By the 2nd year they'd started shadowing my rounds outside the wing entirely, waiting by the mess hall doors at shift change, trailing me at a lazy distance through the cargo corridors while station crew flattened themselves against the walls, and I told them, over and over, that the cats weren't hunting anyone, they were just bored, and I was the most familiar thing moving. Most of the crew got used to it, a few never did, and I didn't blame them. There is nothing reassuring about watching something built to kill decide, on its own authority, to walk quietly instead. That should have stayed a small, private, unremarkable thing between me and 3 animals nobody else paid attention to. It stopped being small the week Central sent an inspection team. Central inspections are a formality most years. A walkthrough, a signature, a shuttle back out by evening. This year the delegation brought their own security escort, and the escort brought Chief Auditor Perrin Voss, a man who reviews communication logs the way other people look for crimes they already believe happened. He found my after-hours frequency inside 4 hours. Found that it wasn't logged under any calibration protocol Central recognized, because the vet and I had never bothered to file it. Why would we? It was just a habit that happened to help. Voss decided it was something else, an unregistered channel, running nightly, tucked behind legitimate traffic. He used the word sabotage in his report before he'd asked me a single question. He asked his questions in the courtyard instead, in front of the whole delegation, because a public confession looks better on a review than a quiet one. I told him the truth. It's a tune I hum. It calms the sovereign. That's the whole secret. And I watched him decide not to believe a word of it. Unregistered predators, an unregistered signal, and a technician who can't produce authorization for either, he said, loud enough for the tier of Central officials behind him. That's not a coincidence. That's a smuggling channel with a very patient cover story. He ordered me held for questioning, and because a station on formal review doesn't leave loose variables sitting around during an inspection, he ordered the quarantine wing's containment override, the fast kind, the kind meant for animals that have become a liability instead of an asset. I told him the cubs weren't a liability. I told him they'd never harmed anyone in 3 years of half-open enclosures and unsupervised evening walks. He told me that was exactly what a well-run cover story would look like, right up until it wasn't. 2 of his security detail had their hands on my arms when the wing's containment alarm went quiet instead of loud, not because the override failed, but because there was nothing left inside to contain. The Sovereign had stopped waiting for their gate hours ago, the way they always did around this time of my shift. They just usually found me in the booth. Today they found the courtyard. I want to say I heard them coming. I didn't. 300 kilos of predator moves quieter than you'd think when it isn't hunting. What I heard was the delegation go silent, all at once. The particular silence of people realizing they're not the largest thing in the room anymore. They didn't run at anyone. That's the part Voss never understood about them and never would. They walked in at an even pace, fanned out without any signal from me, and put themselves between the security detail and the man they'd apparently decided still belonged to them, the one I'd raised smallest. I'd called her Ember for the color she'd had as a cub, though there was nothing small about her now. Sat down directly in front of me, angled her body so that reaching me meant going through her first, and looked at Voss with the flat, unhurried patience of something that has never once needed to hurry. Nobody moved. Voss's security detail had their hands on stunners, and weren't using them, because 3 fully grown apex predators standing in perfect, deliberate formation is not what a smuggling operation's guard dogs look like, and everyone with eyes in that courtyard could tell the difference. "Stand them down," Voss said to me, like I had a leash I'd been hiding. "I don't control them," I said. "Nobody does. They just recognize me. That's the whole thing you couldn't find in the logs." It was the senior central inspector who broke the standoff, not Voss. She'd been quiet the whole review, the kind of quiet that watches rather than waits. She walked past Voss's shoulder, past 2 grown Sovereign who tracked her with their eyes and let her pass anyway, because she wasn't reaching for me, and crouched down in front of Ember at a careful, unthreatened distance. 3 years, she said, on an unfiled frequency, and this is what it built. She looked up at Voss. "You filed Sabotage. I'm filing something else." She called it the Verified Resonance Clause, right there in the courtyard, dictating it into her recorder before Voss could object. A formal designation for a bond that had grown out of no protocol Central had ever written, protecting the frequency, the enclosure access, and my after-hours habit of humming an old, useless little tune while I worked. Voss stood there through the whole dictation with his sabotage report still open on his slate, unable to find a single word to put after it. The delegation left that evening the way delegations do, quietly and on schedule, except that the story of it didn't leave with them. It's been 3 weeks. I still run the overnight loop. I still hum the same flat, wandering tune my grandmother left me, because it turns out I never was making it for anyone. I was just the first sound 3 frightened animals ever trusted, and they've been generous enough to keep trusting it since. Ember sleeps against the booth's outer wall most nights now, close enough that I can hear her breathing through the maintenance panel. I've stopped needing to explain to new arrivals why the wing's gate sits unlocked. They ask once, then they see who answers when I hum, and they stop asking.